one very simple message that I know Howard would have wanted to share with you today, and that is so important to reiterate, because the story of the wars just keeps receding in the national discussion. And it's something that I think the Occupy movement can force back onto the national agenda, just as it has the glaring inequality of wealth in this country, the lack of democracy in this country. And that is so important to do these days. In fact, if you look at the New York Times today, in that article, there's not a single person who criticizes the plan to send more troops to the region. There are some, of course, right-wingers who say there should be more troops, that we should be talking about more installations, but no one presents the alternative view. The one place in the newspaper today, in the New York Times, where you can find a differing point of view is to go to the film section and read an interview with Woody Harrelson. And there Woody Harrelson, the actor, talks about oil wars. There Woody Harrelson talks about the pollution of our environment. There he talks about the issues that are not being raised in the news pages, where the anti-war voice has been systematically silenced over the last 10 years. And that is something that I hope increasingly we can take up as an issue for this movement to put back on the national agenda. Howard wrote an essay that in some ways I think was as much about himself as about the person he wrote it about. But if you have a chance to read it, Howard wrote an essay about the socialist Eugene Debs. And it's really a very powerful piece, and I highly recommend you take a look at it. It's available on the internet. It's available in a few collections of Howard's writings. It's also an introduction or an afterword to a very good book by Alan Moss called The Case for Socialism. And in that, Howard talks about some of the inspiration, some of the lessons from the struggles of the labor organizer, the socialist Eugene Debs. And if you look at what Howard said about that word, he said we're in need about Eugene Debs in that essay. He said we're always in need of radicals who are lovable, and Howard was certainly a radical who was lovable. And he said what is so inspiring about Debs is that he was someone whose words were bold and inspirational, and the more bold and the more inspirational they were, the more inviting they were. And I think that was something that's really important about Howard's legacy. Howard was outspoken, he was bold, he stated very clearly his vision of what he wanted the world to be like. And it reminded me, thinking about what he said about Debs and thinking about the strength of the Occupy movement, how much it has energized, how much it has inspired people, of a demand that came out in 1968 during the student and worker occupations in France. A very important period of upheaval with I think, again, lessons for us in the Occupy movement today. And they had a very simple slogan in France in 1968: be realistic, demand the impossible.
Love it.
And by that slogan, they did not mean demand things that are impossible, in the sense of we want the rivers to be flowing with lemonade. What they meant, I think, was demand things that are impossible from the standpoint of the system as it is currently constructed, but which in fact are possible. For example, demand things that wouldn't otherwise be possible under the logic of a profit system which cares only about profit, not about human need, but from the standpoint of human need are possible. So, for example, when we go to a hospital, I think it is very fair to demand that the question that is asked of us is not, what health insurance do you have? But the question should be, how can we help you? Where are you hurting? What is your illness? And how can we address it? Regardless of whether or not you have health insurance, regardless of whether or not you can pay for that. We as a society can afford that. That is something that we can demand, and that is increasingly something that I think we should demand. And in fact, more and more people have come to identify as a goal that they identify with and something that they think this society ought to deliver. And those kinds of demands are the kinds of demands that point to the kind of economic system we have the kind of social system we have and the kind of far-reaching social changes that we really need to bring about. And a final lesson that I think emerges from Howard's work and from the struggles that he documented in the Voices of People's History, in the People Speak, and in his other work. And that's simply that social movements, protest movements, never move in linear lines. That they don't grow in a straight line, that there are zigs and zags, that there are setbacks, that there are periods of detours and defeats, and that you need to be prepared to weather the storms, literally weather the storms, but also weather the figurative storms that will come from any movement that is challenging the establishment and that is challenging the basic institutions of a society and fighting for the kinds of fundamental changes that people in the Occupy movement, I believe, are fighting for. And that means having, as in addition to a sense of urgency about all the issues that we are raising, also a sense of political patience, that it's not going to happen tonight, it's not going to happen tomorrow, it's going to take time, it's going to take more numbers, it's going to take greater organization, it's going to take education, it's going to take outreach, it's going to take work, and it's going to take an ability to collectively learn how to weather the twists and turns that are ahead of us, but keep our eyes on the prize. Howard Zinn, presente. Sure. I think if people want to come up and ask a question from the mic, that would allow it to be filmed, or if people just want to shout out.
Hello, everyone. I don't do this often, so please bear with me. You people, you have been swindled, hoodwinked, bamboozled into believing that the American dream can be achieved through hard work and education. We are here because we are the 99%. Am I right?
Yeah.
Am I right?
Yeah.
We're here because we're tired of corporations leaving us the scraps and the scrapes to eat from. Your parents have delegated these powers to these corporations. Your great-grandparents have delegated powers to these corporations. I'm here to tell you that we're here to take that power back.
Woo!
You see, yeah. So, anyone else?
Pretty good.
Sure. Question right here.
You don't have to go up.
Oh,
It's
okay.
whatever
Okay.
you want to do.
Well, I just had a question if you could speak a little bit about the relationship between the United States and Iran and the further escalation of maybe military intervention in Iran regarding the recent terror plot from
Yeah.
to assassinate the Saudi Arabian ambassador.
So there's a question, I'll repeat the questions for those who didn't hear it, about Iran and U.S. Policy towards Iran, the threat, escalating threat perhaps of U.S. intervention against Iran, the recent plot, that the claim that Iran was involved in a plot that the U.S. is disrupting to kill an ambassador of Saudi Arabia. The belligerence towards Iran, the ongoing threat that the United States might attack Iran, I think has to be taken very seriously. If you look at the article I mentioned in today's New York Times about Iraq and why the United States needs to send more troops to the region, and of course, the countries that they're talking about sending troops to are countries that are brutalizing their own countries, their own populations. So Bahrain, for example, which is engaged in terrific abuse of human rights against the people of Bahrain, is one of the main partners that the United States is seeking to enhance its security relationship with, and is sending weapons to that country, even as they talk about, of course, how we're this beacon of freedom and democracy and we're aiding the Arab peoples who are fighting for their freedom, well, except in Saudi Arabia, except in Bahrain, and so on. But anyway, one of the reasons they say we have to have all these troops there, of course, is the threat of Iran. And the belligerence vis-a-vis Iran also comes in very important ways from Israel. And so there's been increasing threats and discussions in Israeli newspapers and among Israeli politicians about airstrikes against Iran as well. And so I think Obama has been as belligerent as George Bush on this question. Some people hoped that electing Obama might somehow be a deterrent to this escalation with Iran, but in fact it hasn't in any way been that. And so I think this is something that we have to be quite vigilant about and pay a lot of attention to, and increasingly have to be prepared to organize around if it gets further down the road towards possible airstrikes.
If you don't have to go up to ask a question, the camera can turn.
Other questions? Sorry. Any? Afterwards.
Can I get your autographed?
Yes.
Can I get your autograph?
You can.
Okay.
You can. Do you want to ask a question?
Anybody have a
Does
pen?
anyone have a pen?
I don't have a pen.
Paper?
Maybe while someone else is asking a question, I will autograph something.
Oh, and you got paper in your pocket.
Oh, yeah, I do.
Can I write on that?
Yes, you may.
So,
Yeah, I'll write on there. Okay, I'm going to sign this piece of paper after someone else asks a question.
Someone ask a
I
question,
have a
please.
question.
Question.
Damn.
Don't tell me you forgot.
How long is it going to take for all of us to get the point across? How long is it going to take for all of us to see the change that we want to see in the world?
Probably 1 year.
What do we have to do to get our power back from these corporations and this government? We have to stand up for what we believe in. We have to fight if we have to. You know, 50 years from now, when your grandkids or your children are going to be looking at you, be like, Dad, where the hell were you when they removed our freedom? How are you going to answer them? That's the question. Please approach the bench.
what's your question?
Sorry, got here a little late. Can you speak about the financialization of the global capitalist system and the viability of, maybe keeping the capitalist system intact and just maybe, toning down on the financialization aspect or in speculation, everything like that, or maybe trying to work towards a new economic system that's maybe more collectivist or something like that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is at the heart of the issues that we should be addressing. Certainly, there's a lot that you can say about how financialization of capitalism has led to the current economic crisis. That the kind of enhanced power of the banks in the economy, the enhanced power of financial institutions and their increasing influence over other institutions, Congress and so on, has been so destructive of jobs, has been so destructive of the quality of life in this country, and so on. But I think really to step back and look at what's happening, it's not financialization alone. Financialization is a symptom of the entire economic system and how we have an economic system which is based on profit, not based on meeting human need. And that there's a complete disconnect between what we need collectively as humans in terms of taking care of our environment, in terms of educating people, in terms of taking care of children, in terms of giving people meaningful lives and fulfilling lives, and what a system based on profit will ever achieve. no matter how much we limit the power of financial institutions. So for me, this is really a moment not just to talk about, yes, it would be nice to tax financial institutions, a Tobin tax, 1%. That would be a great thing. I mean, it's a simple thing, and it would be a reform worth fighting for. But to me, that's not even beginning to address the scale of the problem, and we really do have to ask much more fundamental questions about the kind of economy we have, the kind of economic system we have, and that's a global economic system. It's called capitalism, and I think that's why we need to start talking about alternatives to capitalism, start talking about socialism, start talking about societies that would be based on human need and would be democratic, truly democratic, where your rights wouldn't end when you enter the workplace, as they do for working people in this country, where we would have control over all of the decisions that affect our lives, our environment, our communities, unlike the society we live in today. And there's a speech in the Voices of a People's History of the United States that Howard and I included from Martin Luther King. And of course, we in the society get this very sanitized image of King. And, you know, we have the increasing, we actually have insurance companies using King to advertise